Thank you, Alec. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, Simon, for the invitation to come and talk to you today about some reflections on continuous improvement. And in coming to the podium, I'm reminded of a book. I don't know if some of you have read this book. It's called The Chimp Paradox, and it's a book about behavioral psychology and things that kind of frighten you and all the rest. But the central tenet of the book is that the chimp is the dominant aspect of our brains, and that we behave that way when we receive information initially. But in the book he says the worst moment is the moment when you go up to address peers, like I am doing now. He said the chimp is absolutely at its worst and is screaming madly. So if you see extraordinary facial grimacing and some chimp-like behavior, you'll know that I'm the living embodiment of that theory. I just want to talk to you about our experience in the state claims agency. So just to begin to talk with some themes that resonate actually with what Paula spoke about in terms of risk management and continuous improvement, to talk about our data, what it's telling us, and why we need to improve more, and then to talk to you about cost, and then continuous improvement in terms of reform in our tort system. So just a very brief who we are. You might be interested in knowing that we were founded as a direct result of the army deafness debacle, when it was estimated that it would cost the state about $1 billion. And the then Attorney General Dermot Leeson decided that the state should never again be faced with such a crisis without having an organisation that could properly meet not just the litigation aspects of it, but indeed the risk management. And in the State Claims Agency, you may not be aware of this, we have two risk arms, one which deals with general liabilities arising out of property ownership and so on, but also on the clinical side. And so we have groups of scientists and physicians and physiotherapists and nurses within the organisation. Just to talk about the continuous improvement challenge, and this is a particular quotation that I have here from these two authors. So they say, we propose defining it as the combined and increasing, unceasing efforts of everyone, healthcare professionals, patients and their families, researchers, payers, planners and educators, to make the changes that will lead to better patient outcomes in health, better system performance, care, and better professional development learning. This definition arises from our conviction that healthcare will not realise its full potential unless change-making becomes an intrinsic part of everyone's job every day in all parts of the system. They say, defined in this way, improvement involves a substantial shift in our idea of the work of healthcare, a challenging task that can benefit from the use of a wide variety of tools and methods. So what are the traits of a high reliability organisation? This is taken from these two authors called Wake and Sutcliffe in Managing the Unexpected. This is a really powerful book. I don't know if you've read it, but the 2007 edition is the latest edition, and it's really worth reading for all hospital CEOs and hospital managers. So they say these are the 5 traits. Preoccupied with failure, so proactively look for failures in a process or system. Avoid acceptance of simple explanations. A problem that appears simple is likely not well defined. Sensitive to operations, awareness that everything is a process. Defer to experts. Listen to people who have the knowledge. And what they say here is, it isn't necessarily authority or the manager you should be listening to. It's in fact the experts, the people on the ground, on the front line. And then committed to resilience. Respond to failures and continuously seek new solutions. And they talk about this idea of going from where they say that there's a lot of repetition. We do things and we think they're good and we keep repeating them, but actually the sign of a really robust and high reliability organisation is one that moves to mindfulness and takes on the new challenges that are posed. So these are just some slides I took from A.J. Singh, who spoke at our conference last year, and I just thought they're worth repeating here for you. Lesson 1, this is from the United States, the problem is large, between 44 and 98,000 deaths annually, 7,000 for medication errors, and then the cost between 17 and 29 billion. And he says that there's relative silence in relation to this. This one here puts it in context when you look at accidents coming from other areas like motor vehicle deaths and so on. You can see that accidental deaths as a result of our healthcare system is quite a challenge. This is taken from Professor Albert Wu, who spoke at our conference last year. You probably know him. He's a Harvard consultant who specializes in the concept of the secondary victim. But basically what he says is that it's a vortex of things, that workers aren't to blame in the health system, that really it is systems. And I must say, in analyzing our clinical negligence cases, and the good thing is that we've moved away from this kind of attribution of blame to a consultant or a nurse or other practitioner, that what we find is we never or rarely see a negligent practitioner in his own right that causes something to happen. It's about other things that happen. Like Paula said earlier on wrong-sided surgery, the consultant gets it wrong initially in his consulting room, and then the system repeats the error right across. And then you can see the quotation there from Lucian Leap that incompetent people are at most 1% of the problem, and the rest, he says, is down to systems. Leadership. Leadership is important. Patient safety has to be a priority. You must make patient safety everyone's responsibility. Set clear objectives and expectations, commit resources, develop effective mechanisms for identifying and dealing with unsafe practitioners if they're there, promote effective team functioning, anticipate the unexpected, and create a learning environment. And he quotes Albert Einstein, the type of thinking that got us into these problems will not be the type of thinking that will get us out. And that goes back to the theory of Wake and Sutcliffe, as I was saying earlier on, where it is about mindfulness and how we look at things a little bit differently. So I'm quoting here from a Harvard Business Review article, a very, very current article, where Thomas Lee has carried out some really detailed new research. And he says, my colleagues and I have analysed data on patient experience as well as publicly reported data on patient safety and business performance. We have found that these performance outcomes are correlated. Organizations with better patient experience also have better safety records and report better financial margins. Clinical quality performance was better in the hospitals with the better patient experience performances. Going back to what Paula said earlier on, what is the first question in the boardroom? And it seems that if you want to really link the two here, clinical quality performance and in fact better financial outcomes. I'll just read a little extract from the article for you. It says, there is great news for chief financial officers too in the analysis. Hospitals with better safety and patient experience performance also had better financial performance. And he goes on to say, the association between various outcomes and the various measures of engagement is most consistent with the conclusion that engaged physicians, nurses, and other personnel, people who are proud of their organization, who believe it is committed to quality and safety, and who consider teamwork a core value, perform better. And finally, he states that if they believe that the organization cares about quality and safety, and if core values include compassion for patients and teamwork, there is a good chance that better financial and quality performance will follow. It's a pretty good piece of analysis. I want to talk to you just and fly through some of the data challenges, so when things go wrong and what our data is telling us in the agency. And we've just produced in May, at the end of May, this new report called National Clinical Incidence Claims and Cost Report, Lessons Learned, a 5-year review, where we're going back over our data set over those couple of years. And you can see here, spread out over some specialties that we've taken, like medicine, maternity services, surgery, and disability services, that there are, these are the most common clinical incidents nationally, and we break them down here by various categories. So you can see that medicine has the highest number, followed by maternity services and surgery falling behind that. And you can see the kind of things, the current themes that are coming up there, like delay, failure to treat, failure of faulty medical device equipment, incorrect dosage, missed medication, serious soft tissue damage, and so on. So it tells its own story. Looked at in terms of clinical claims created as a result of those incidents, you'll see that surgery goes up the list and medicine falls behind, even though it has more incidents. And that's not terribly surprising, I guess. And again, we've broken it down by the various factors. So just to look at medicine for a moment, you can see there that when we add in a couple of other categories, the total number of incidents in that period of time are roughly about 69,000. And you can see again how they break down, with obviously top of the list, delay and failure to treat leading to an adverse outcome. If we look at surgery, just by comparison, we can see again that top of the list there is failure of faulty medical device equipment. I should say, by the way, the large category of other is a feature, unfortunately, of our legacy data, where we permitted hospitals to pick another category. We have stopped doing that in our new pick list, which is the World Health Organization taxonomy. So the capacity to use other now is extremely limited. So our data, our own data, is constantly improving and getting better. So just to talk to you about the cost challenge, and to put things in perspective for you, we're managing roughly 9,000 claims with a total liability of 2.2 billion, of which 1.67 billion relates to clinical claims. And you'll see that 65%, in fact, of the cost of all clinical claims is driven by obstetrics. It is the single, obviously, biggest challenge for us, with catastrophically injured children and the settlements in those cases, which are extremely challenging. So just to give you a look at where we were last year, in 2016 we received clinical claims 669 and we resolved 655. And if you look at the cost of managing the entire portfolio of liabilities that we manage, you'll see it steadily going up from 192 in 2015 to 205 in 2016. That is going to considerably jump this year in 2017 as a result of a case that I just want to mention to you in a minute. Looking very quickly then at clinical claims finalised overall, you'll see that over the 4 years we have spent a total of 289 million between awards, settlements, legal fees and so on. The good news is that between 2010, legal costs have actually reduced from 60% to 50% in 2014. And the reason for that was some critical action that we took ourselves in relation to how we manage the legal fees. Just in the field of medicine, you can see it cost roughly 81 million over that period of time. And in surgery, it cost 59 million. So all fairly large sums, and it goes back to our quality agenda again. I just want to talk about this real rate of return issue, because it's going to pose a real issue for all defendants who are managing clinical negligence cases. And it's a case that was heard in the High Court on the 18th of December 2014, which reduced the real rate of return, which is used for calculating the cost of future care and so on, from 3% to 1%. The Court of Appeal heard the appeal on the 7th of July 2015. And very interestingly, we were arguing for a prudent investor test, that a catastrophically injured victim should be no different to anybody who gets a large sum of money that they would want to invest in a portfolio of assets. But the Court of Appeal strongly rejected that and said absolutely not, that it must be tied to as risk-free an investment as possible. And therefore they set the rate at an effective rate of 1.1%. We had settled a number of cases based on the 3% with a proviso that by the time this would all be heard and go to the Supreme Court, that if there was an uplift, we would pay it. It cost roughly about 45 million alone in terms of that. If you want to see it in the particular case, when we calculated the damages at 3%, they're at roughly 10 million. When we recalculate them, they're at 13.5 million, an uplift of 38%, so a particular challenge. Just to mention to you that if you think we're bad at 1.1%, the Lord Chancellor in the UK reduced the equivalent rate there to minus 0.75%, which added billions overnight to the liabilities of our equivalent over there, the NHSLA. Could I just mention one last thing in continuous improvement in the tort area, which is about the kind of things that are coming along. Most of you are familiar with open disclosure. The good news is that the Act, which will frame the open disclosure issue, is going to provide the proper protection for the doctor's apology and so on. So when open disclosure has that kind of statutory basis behind it, we are so behind this project, and as you know, we piloted this with the HSE. It is absolutely the right thing to do. We have the periodic payment order legislation, which is currently in the Dáil, and it is expected that that may be promulgated, in fact, before the end of July. I want to mention the pre-action protocols. The pre-action protocols will absolutely revolutionize how we handle medical negligence cases into the future. The idea of these is to do away with this kind of adversarial mode where we and the plaintiffs engage one another in a guessing game. And so what it does is it imposes a whole set of new behaviours on defendants and plaintiffs, whereby you freely share your information and you net out what's actually in dispute between you, and hopefully bring down the value of cases, but significantly, I think, for plaintiffs, and particularly, families of plaintiffs who are badly damaged as a result of a medical event, that they will get their compensation much quicker and in less adversarial fashion. There will be a cultural change here for hospitals, because you will be given an absolutely small period of time within which you can provide the records and within which you can respond. And I think definitely for us, I think dealing with the general health service, that's going to be a very significant problem. So there are just some thoughts on how we view things in terms of the continuous improvement from the State Claims Agency. Thank you.